Hi everyone, I'm Patrick and welcome to the Supabase crash course for Python developers. In this video we cover almost all important features that we can use with Supabase. I leave an overview here and also I leave timestamps below the video, so feel free to jump around if you're interested in a particular topic. Also, I want to say a big thank you to Supabase for sponsoring this video. I was a big fan already, so I was very happy that they agreed on sponsoring me. And if you want to check it out as well, I leave a link in the description below. You can get started for free. And now, without further ado, let's get started. Supabase is an open source Firebase alternative, so it's a hosted platform that gives us a Postgres database, authentication and authorization, auto-generated APIs, edge functions, real-time subscriptions, and storage. And with this, we can build our apps around this. For example, we can build a JavaScript front end or a mobile app, or in our case, a Python app. And here it says built in a weekend and scale to millions. And I think this is actually true. So I've used this before several times for personal projects and really like it. It's super simple to get started. And as I said, it's open source, so we can find this on GitHub. It's pretty popular and we can actually self-host this if we want this. So there's an official guide how to do this. But in our case, we just use the hosted solution and they offer a pretty generous free tier. So we get a database and file storage, then we get authentication and we can have 50,000 monthly active users. So I think this is more than enough to get your projects off the ground. So now in this tutorial, we learn how to work with supabase-py, which is the Python client for Supabase. So let's get started with our first project. So let's start a new project. For this, of course, we have to create an account so you can sign up with GitHub. That's what I did. And here I already created a demo project. So now we want to create a new project. So let's choose your organization and then let's give this a name. So I call this to-do app to create a simple to-do app. Then let's also create a password. So I use Patrick Lober 1234 just for the demo. Then we can select the region and the plan. So we continue with the free plan here and let's click on create new project. So our project was created. Here, if you scroll down, we find the project URL and the API key that we need to grab in a moment. We can also have a look at different client libraries and see how to work with them. In our case, we're going to use the Python client in a few moments. Then we can also have a look at different example projects. So here we find starter templates for different frameworks. But now let's continue by getting started by building out the database. So now we want to create a table. And here we work with a Postgres database. So we can get started in two different ways, either by using the SQL editor and using different SQL commands, or by using the table editor. So we want to click on table editor and then let's click on create a new table. Then let's give this a name, to-dos, for a simple to-do list example. Then let's also give it a description, to-do items. And then here we see enable row level security, RLS, which is recommended and enabled by default. This gives us an additional layer of security. But for now, we disable this to make it simpler, but we get back to this and enable this later. And then here we can create our different columns. So we already have an ID, which is a unique identifier, and this is our primary key. And we have a created at timestamp. So let's click on add column and let's give this a name. So the name is name for the to-do name. Then we also have to select a data type. Here, for example, we can use integers or floats or JSON. And in our case, we want to use the varchar to use a string. And here we don't give this a default value. So we want to fill this later when we create this. So let's click on save and this will create the table. And now the table was created. So here on the left, we are still inside the table editor. And now we can insert rows manually. So we don't set a ID. This is automatically generated then. And we also leave the created at timestamp out. So this will use the current time by default. And for the name, let's use item 1. And then hit save. And now this will add the first row to our table. And now instead of doing this manually, we want to do this from the code, of course. So for this, let's learn how to use the Supabase-py client. So let's learn how to work with the supabase-py package. We can install this with pip install supabase, and then here we find different code snippets, for example, for authentication, signing in, and managing data. And we're gonna have a look at all of those examples, but first we need to set up the client, and for this we need to create a client, and then we also need the Supabase URL and the key for this. So let's go to our IDE, and here I have a new project and the terminal here inside my IDE. So here I say pip install supabase, and then I also want to install python.env to store the environment variables in a env file. So let's hit enter and install this, and then let's create a new file that we call .env. And now let's go back to the docs. So we could export them and set them on our machine, but I want to store them in here. So let's paste this in here and remove the export statements. And now we need to get the actual URL and key. So let's go back to our project, and then here on the left we can go to project settings, and then let's go to API, and here you can copy the URL. So let's replace this part with the actual URL, and now we also need the API key. So there are two different ones, the public one and also a secret one. So the secret one has the ability to bypass row level security, and as I said, we enable this later, but for now we can simply work with the public one. So let's copy and paste this in here. And now we can save this and go back and implement our first code. So the first thing is to set up the client. So let's copy and paste this in here. And I actually want to get rid of the type hints here because I want to keep it simple. So let's remove this and this and this. So we import OS, and then we also say from Supabase import create client. Then we need to load the URL and the key, and then we create the client. But in order to access those environment variables now, of course, we need to say from .env import load.env, and then we call this load.env. And let's actually make this the very first statement in our code, so that now that we can work with this. And now if we save this and let's clear this and run this, then this should actually work without an error. So yeah, now we have our client and now we can work with this. So let's learn how to do the basic create, read, update, and delete operations in Python. But before we do it in Python, I want to show you one cool thing. In the dashboard, we can click on API docs. And here we find API documentation that is automatically generated and specific to our project. For example, here we can select the to-dos table. And then here we find code snippets for all the basic operations in JavaScript and for the bash. Unfortunately, not for Python, but the Python client code is very similar to the JavaScript client code. So for example, let's go to read rows and then let's select bash. And then we can copy this curl command. And then in the top, we can also select the public API key. So now here it already uses this API key. And as you can see, it uses the URL and then it's setting the API key as header and also a authorization token as header. So let's copy this and let's go to a terminal and then paste the command in here. And if we hit enter, then now it's returning the one row in our table. So this is working. And now we want to do this in Python. So for this, let's go to the Python documentation and we need to go to selection of data. And then we only need this one line. So here we say data equals Supabase table. And then the table name in our case is called to-dos. And then we select star, so we select everything and then say execute. And now if we print data, then it should produce the exact same results that we are seeing here. So let's save this and run the code. And yeah, it's working. So now we see how to select data in Python. And here we say select star. So for example, we can also say select the ID and only the name. And then if we run this, then it's selecting only the ID and the name and not the created at timestamp. And then here, for example, we can also apply filters by saying dot. And then, for example, we want to use the equal filter where we have to say, or where we want to say the name should be equal to, let's try item 2. And if we run this, then it should return an empty list because no item in our to-do list is called item 2. So let's try item 1. And now if we run this, then it should again find this data here. And to see all the available filters, you could either have a look at this in your code by looking at the possible auto-completions, or you can again go to your API docs, and then also here there should be a section that is called filtering. And if you switch to JavaScript, then here you see different possible filters. For example, we have equal to, greater than, less than. We have also greater than or equal, and some other possible filters. So yeah, play around with them if you want to have different filters. So let's continue with some more operations. So next, let's learn how to insert new items. And for this, we want this command. So let's copy and paste this in here. So here we say Supabase table and then again to-dos, and now we insert. And then here we can give it the name. Let's call this to-do2. And then the ID and the created at are automatically generated. So if we fetch some data afterwards again, so let's comment this out here. And let's paste this in here, and let's get rid of the equal filter. And let's also say star here again. So now let's run this, and now it should insert this new item, and then it's returning this data. So now it found 2 different items. And then also if we go back to our dashboard and then go to the table editor and then select the to-dos, then now as you can see, it has the second item in our table. And the ID and the created at timestamp was automatically generated. So of course we could also, for example, let's say from date time, we want to import date time and also a time delta. And then here, let's create a timestamp where we say created at equals datetime.utc now. And then let's say minus time delta where we say hours equals 2. And then here as second field, when inserting in the dictionary, we say created at, and this should be as a string, the created at time. And now let's call this to do 3 and save this and run this. And now in this case, it used the custom time that we set. So if we refresh the page, then we now have 3 items, and as you can see, this timestamp was 2 hours earlier than the current time. So this is how we insert data. Then we can also update data, of course. So let's comment this out, and let's go back to the documentation. And for updating data, we need this line. So let's copy and paste this in here. And here we say Supabase table, then again we call this to-dos. And then let's, for example, update the name to be the updated name. And then here we could update also more fields, but in our case we only update the name. And then again, we need a filter. For example, again, we use the equal filter where we check ID equals to 1. And then let's comment this out and only use the update command and run the script, and this worked. And then if we go to our table and refresh the page, then here we see where the ID is 1, we updated the name to be updated name. So this is working. And the last operation we can do is, of course, also delete data. So let's try this. So let's comment this out. And then for deleting data, we say Supabase table, and again to-dos. And now here we want to delete where equal to ID is 1. And now let's run this. And then again, let's refresh our page with the table. And then you see we no longer have the ID 1 in here. So this is how you do the basic create, read, update, and delete operations in Python. And now as next thing, let's have a look at how to do authentication and authorization. So let's learn about authentication and authorization. And for this, let's create a new file, o2 auth.py. Then again, we want to copy the first part to set up our client. And in this case, we don't need this line. And now let's first go back to the docs of supabase-py. And here we find the authentication example. So let's copy this part and paste it in here. So in this case, we do a sign up per email. First, let's go back to our dashboard. And here we can also select the authentication tab. And let's also have a look at the docs. So let's go to the documentation, and under Auth, you see that we can have many different options. For example, log in with email, magic link, Apple, and a lot more. And in this case, we can select the providers, and then the email is automatically enabled. If we want to use different ones, then we also have to enable them here. And then here you could invite the users, but we sign them up from Python code now. So let's say the email is, I use my email here. So let's say pat@python-engineer.com. And then as a password, let's say Patrick Lober 1234. And then this is no longer a random email. So this is my actual email and my password. So now let's run this. And first, let's only sign this up. So now we say Python o2 auth.py. Oh, so it's Python o2-auth.py. And now I should get an email. So let's wait a few moments. And here I got my email. If I bring this here, then it says confirm your sign up. So I can click here and confirm this. And then if we go back to our dashboard and refresh this, then now you should see my new email. So yeah, now we have our first user. So now after signing up, we can, the next time, of course, we can also sign in. And the code is actually the very same, except that now it's saying sign in instead of sign up. So let's copy and paste this here as well. And now here it's called email and password. And now after signing in, let's also print the user. And let's clear this. And now let's run this and see what happens. So this is working. So now we are signed in, and user, I think this is actually not correct. So if we hover over this, we see it's session. So actually, I think it's better to call this session. And now if we print the session, then you see we get an access token. So I talk about this in a moment. And then we also have a user object inside. So for example, we can print session user. So this will give us the current user. So that's why it's better to actually call this session. And one more thing you might notice is that it doesn't give me back the terminal in here. So this means the code here is still running. So there is a separate thread now, and this is still running. So let me actually hit Control C on my keyboard to interrupt this. And now in order to stop this, in the end, you have to say supabase.auth.signout. And now if we save this and run this, then you see in the end, it's giving me back the terminal again. So yeah, remember that this will keep the session open as long as you are signed in. And let's add one more improvement. So let's say the password is wrong. And if we run this, then this will actually throw an exception, so an API error. So let's catch this. So here, let's say from go through exceptions, we want to import the API error, and then let's wrap this in a try except block. And here, let's say accept the API error, and in our case, let's simply print login failed. And now if we run this again, then this should not crash, but instead it should, yeah, let's say session equals none in the beginning, and then we set this here. So let's again run this, and then it should not crash. So yeah, this is how to catch the API error. So now let's make the password correct again and log our user in. And now let's learn what we can do with a logged in user, and also what we want to do with this access token. And for this, we also have to talk about row level security and additional policies. So if you go to the documentation and then under authorization, you find this row level security where you can watch the video or read through this documentation. But basically, this gives you granular authorization rules together with the policies. So by default, everyone can read and write to your database, but this is not ideal. So what you want to do is to set up additional rules. For example, you can define that only logged in users can read and write to your database tables. Or for example, if you have a paid product with different tiers, for example, free and premium, then you can give different access rights to the different tiers. And yeah, for this is super handy, and it's also easy to set this up. So let's go back to our API dashboard. And in this case, let's go to the table editor first. And in this case, here it's already giving us this hint that the row level security is not enabled. So we disabled this. So let's enable this again and confirm this. And now the first thing we want to try is in the terminal, let's try this curl command again. And now it's giving us an empty list because the row level security locks down the database again. So now what we could do is instead, let's go to the API docs and let's go to to-dos. And then here where we want to read, where is it? Read rows and bash. Instead of the public key, we could use the secret key. And now if we copy this and paste this, then it should work again. So now this will bypass the row level security. And we also find this in project settings under API here as this secret. So we could copy this code and then use it as our API key, but this is actually not how we want to do this. Instead, we want to create a policy. So let's click on Table Editor and our to-dos table. And here you see no active RLS policies right now. So let's click on this and then click on New Policy. And then we can either use a template or get started from scratch. Let's use a template here. Here, for example, we can enable read access to everyone. Then we can enable insert access for authenticated users only. Or we can make this based on different fields. For example, enable update access for users based on their email. Or here, for example, we can make this based on a field. For example, if we have different tiers like free or premium, then we can enable read access only for premium members or something like this. In our example, let's enable read access for authenticated users only. So let's use this template. And now here we can change the allowed operations. So let's use select, and then let's also change the policy name. So we want to enable select for authenticated users only. The target role is still authenticated. For example, here we can also use different ones. And as using expression, we simply say true. So everyone that is authenticated can then have select access. And then here we can review this again. And now we create this. And now this policy is in place. So now authenticated users should be able to read the database again. So let's confirm this. And first I want to go to the API docs and grab the curl command again for reading the database. So here under read rows, let's select the public key here, and this should no longer work. So let's copy the command. And let's actually also save this away here in a txt file so that we can edit this more easily. So let's copy and paste this to the terminal. And now this should give us an empty list. So yeah, here we have it. But now we want to set the access token of a logged in user here. So let's comment out the sign out statement. And now instead of printing the whole session, let's only print session.access token. And let's run this. So let's say Python and then our script. And now you see it prints the access token. So let's copy this. And we don't get back the terminal because we are still signed in. So now in our command here, the API key is still our public Supabase key, but now for the BIRA token, this part here, we want to select this and remove this and now paste in the access token. And now if we use this whole command and paste this in here and hit enter, then now it's working again. So now again we have read access. So this is how it's working with row level security and the policies and then the tokens. So now we want to do this in Python as well. So here let me hit Control C and stop this. And then first let's grab some data and say data before signing in. So this should be an empty list. And let's comment this out and run this. And then we see we also have an empty list here. And now let's also do this after the login. So here we say data after login. And now in an ideal case, this would automatically set the access token. But right now there is still a small bug in the Supabase client, so it's not done automatically, but there's already an open issue, so I think they will fix this soon. Now instead we have to set this manually with a small workaround. So here after signing in, we also have to set this in the authentication part. So we want to say supabase.postgrest and then .auth, and this will authenticate the client with a token. So here we put in session.access token. So first let me comment this out again and confirm that right now it's still an empty list after the sign in. So here you see 2 times we get an empty list. And now we set the access token in this part. And now let's run this again. And now we get back the data again. And this is how we can enable row level security and then also have a policy in place and can work with a logged in user and the access token. So now that we've learned about authentication, let's talk about a different topic, and this is the storage. So let's create a new file, and first let's have a look at the documentation. So here we can click on storage and overview, and then here Supabase storage makes it simple to store and serve large files. For example, here we can upload images or videos. And then we can also go to our dashboard, and then on the left we can click on storage, and then we can create a new bucket and give this a name. For example, let's call this image bucket, and then we want to make this public. So here again we can enable row level security policies, but to keep it simple, let's simply keep this public, and then let's click on create. And now here we can manually drop files. For example, let me drop this Twitter profile image here, and then it's already uploaded. So here we can access this and also copy the URL. And then if we paste this here, then here we have our image, which is now served from this storage. And now, of course, we want to do this in the code. So here again, let's create our client and copy this part. And now we can access the storage by saying response equals supabase.storage.from underscore, and now the bucket name. So this was called image bucket. And then we say dot get public URL. And this was called, I think, put underscore twitter.png. So let's print the response, and now let's say Python and then the file, and here it's working. So let's click on this link and open this, and then again here we see our image. So this is working, and now let's also upload images. So let's comment this out, and now to upload this we want to again use the same first part, Supabase storage from, and then our bucket name, and then we say dot upload, and this gets a path and a file and then also file options if we want. So for the path, let's use a new image. So let me move this in here. So we call this banana.jpg. Here we can simply use the file name. And then for the file, so the first is the path and the second the file, but we actually want to use the same path then. So let's use this and this. And then by default, this will be a text data field. So we want to set this as a JPEG image. So we want to specify the content type, and this is a dictionary. So a dictionary with the key content type, and then the value is image/JPEG. So this is for the header. And now if we save this, and then let's again print the response, I think this still might give us an error. So yeah, like I said, we get a storage exception. So new row violates row level security policy for table objects. So even though we've made this public, here we have to go to policies and then for objects. And now here, let's say new policy. Then again, let's get started quickly and enable read access to everyone. And then we use this template, and then let's enable everything. So here true and true. And then let's click on review. And let's actually also change the policy name, enable all access for all users, and save this. And now the policy is in place. So let's run this again. And now we get the status code 200. So now this is working. And now if we have a look at our image bucket, then we see we also have the banana image that was uploaded. And then we could access this again in our code. And now as last part, let's also have a look at how to use edge functions. So if we have a look at the documentation and go to edge functions, then edge functions are server-side TypeScript functions that can interact with our database. For example, they can be used for listening to webhooks or integrating your Supabase project with third-party libraries like Stripe. And we can also then invoke them from Python. And for this, let's first go to our dashboard again and then go to Edge Functions. And here we see how to create them. So for this, we need the command line interface. If we have a look at the docs and CLI, then here we can install them. So on a Mac, I use brew install and then Supabase tab Supabase. And now after installing this, we can then use this command. So let me copy and paste this. And now let's go to the terminal, and inside the project, let's create a new function by using this command. And now if we have a look at the IDE, then it created this new folder here with our function. And yeah, as I said, this is TypeScript code with here a simple hello world example. And now we want to deploy this. So for this, we want to grab the next command. So Supabase functions deploy, then the name, and then the project ref. So this is automatically filled out here. So let's copy and paste this as well and hit enter. And here it says deployed the function hello world on our project. And if we refresh this, I think we should also see this here. So yeah, here we have this. And now if we send a request to this URL, then we invoke the function. And in our Python SDK, we can also easily do this. So here we have the example snippet. So let's copy and paste this in here. And let's create a new file, 04.func.py, and copy this. And then, of course, we also want to load our env variables. And this was called Supabase URL and Supabase key. Then we create our client, and then we can call Supabase functions. And now we want to create an async function. So we say async def and then a function name. We actually no longer need the decorator. This is deprecated. And we also don't need the argument here, so it's not used. And here we use async IO. So we also need to import this. So we import async IO. And then here we await func invoke and then our function name. In our case, it was called hello world. And then we can also send additional information in the body. So this is an empty dictionary here. And then we return this. Then we create a new event loop and run this. And here we have our function. Then let's also print the response. And now if we run this script, then it should invoke this function and give us the result that our function is doing. So let's run this and see if it works. So yeah, it worked, but it's also giving us a deprecation warning. So I think we want to use new event loop now. So let's try this again. So yeah, now it's working without the warning. So here we get the result. And here we can basically now implement whatever we want. So in this case, it's simply getting the data and then it returns hello name. In our case, it is undefined. So that's why it's not returning a name here. But we can actually now send the name in the body. We can use as key name, and now as name, let's try Patrick. And now if we run this again, then you see the response is message hello Patrick. So let's try another one. Let's try name Jesse, and now we see hello Jesse. And this is how we can work with functions. So of course this is a toy example. So now you could implement here whatever logic you want, and then again deploy this function and then invoke this here, and then again get the result. So yeah, that's all for this crash course. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you need more information you can check out the docs. They are pretty good actually. And let me know in the comments if you want to see more Supabase tutorials in the future on this channel, for example, where I build an actual app with this. And then I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.